Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Nicholas Lamar Soutter, and welcome to Overtime. Representative John Lewis, a fierce advocate for civil rights, beaten to a bloody pulp by Alabama state troopers in 1965, announced 6 months ago that he had pancreatic cancer. Representing Georgia's 5th congressional district, he died Friday at the age of 80. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell called Lewis a pioneering civil rights leader who put his life on the line to fight racism, promote equal rights, and bring our nation into greater alignment with its founding principles. Now, this is a unique episode of In Time. One of the things my father taught me was to look at the news and look for the pieces that people miss that telegraph what's coming down the line. I remember this most when it was 1988. No, let me rephrase that actually, because I should start with ranking member. It was 2005, ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, John Conyers, who sent a letter to then President George W. Bush asking him to confirm or deny the contents of the Downing Street memo. Now, the Downing Street memo accused the Bush administration of cherry-picking data in Iraq regarding their weapons of mass destruction in such a way to engineer a war with Iraq, ostensibly to finish what his father had started and presumably failed to finish. This was bait. John Conyers already knew the answer to this. He wasn't writing it because he wanted that confirmed or denied. He was writing it because he wanted to get Bush on the record as taking a position on the Downing Street memo. Bush didn't take the bait, but in 1998, House Judiciary Chairman Henry Hyde sent Clinton a very similar letter, and that letter asked Clinton to confirm or deny elements of the Starr report. Against legal advice, William Jefferson Clinton answered that letter and said, no, the report was false. When the impeachment charges were later announced against Clinton, those denials represented the fourth and most serious charge against Clinton, that he had lied to Congress, which is a felony. That was why Henry Hyde had sent the letter. He already knew the answer. Everybody had read the Starr report. It was true. But Henry Hyde wanted Clinton to lie to Congress so that he could impeach him. It very nearly worked. And he certainly did, in fact, get Clinton to. I apologize, I'm having a sound issue. He did indeed get Clinton to respond and lie on paper to Congress, and very nearly succeeded in impeaching him. This was John Conyers' goal when he sent a similar letter to Bush. What made this interesting was people who saw this letter argued over, gee, is Bush going to reply? Should he reply? Nobody pointed out the subtext and what this letter demonstrated, which was that John Conyers was planning on filing a motion to impeach the president with the House Judiciary Committee. It's the only reason to send a letter. There's no other reason to send a letter like that. 2 months later, indeed, that's precisely what he did. He telegraphed it. But it was a small piece, page 6 of the New York Times, where they discussed this letter and what Bush was going to do, and nobody sat there and said, excuse me, there's only one reason to send a letter. He's about to make a serious attempt at impeaching the president. So we look for things like that that tell us where things are headed, and sometimes it's very small. Usually it starts small. And one of the things I'm proud of that we do on this show is try to find those things and report on them before they become something big. Several days ago, we had a show, and I mentioned that we had missed one story that I hesitated to bring up. I hesitated to bring it up because it was very inflammatory, and we hadn't had enough corroboration from national news sources. That corroboration is starting to come in, and It seems like a small story. I think it is extraordinarily large. I think it's a very big story, and so we are going to discuss it. And before we do, I do want to mention one other thing. Augusto Pinochet was the Chilean dictator who had perfected an art. This had been done before. He wasn't the first one to do it, but he perfected it of disappearing people, opponents. In some cases, these were criminals. You know, they were genuine criminals who were damaging society, who one day would vanish, never to be heard or seen from again. But it wasn't just criminals. It was people who dissented, people who wrote editorials that were negative towards him. The argument that he seemed to posit as to why this was necessary was because he was trying to save the country from anarchy. And anybody who criticized him was taking power from him that he needed to save that country. Therefore, anybody who criticized him was necessarily an enemy of the state and a criminal, and he could do with whatever he chose. Now, the disappearances was later discovered. There were rumors, but it was later discovered what happened to most of these people. They would a van would drive up, snatch them right off the street. They would be taken. In some cases, they were taken and held for a little while, interrogated, intimidated, and released, so that word would spread that this could happen if you weren't careful. But in many cases, they were taken to the airport, put on board an airplane. The airplane would fly out over the ocean, the door would open, and they would throw them out of the airplane. This is because if you simply kill them, and the body is ever found, a piece of the body is ever found, then you know a murder has been committed, and then an investigation ensues. And if they simply vanish, the question is, well, gee, were they murdered? Did they go into hiding? Did they flee the country? There's been a lot of talk about these people while they were critical of the president, so obviously they fled. No way to know if there's no body. So throw them out of an airplane into the ocean. What we have seen as of about 4 or 5 days ago, and we're going to start this with a story. On July 15th, after a night of what we currently understand to be, at least for these gentlemen, a peaceful protest, there have been still some rioting in Portland, Oregon. It's been diminishing, it's been going down. But at the time, these gentlemen appeared to have not been involved in damaging any federal buildings or any other property. Nonetheless, after a night of what we do understand to be peaceful protesting in Multnomah County, at the Justice Center, which was subsequently set on fire, and we will show some footage of that in a minute, but at the time had not been damaged and was not set on fire, and the Marco Hatfield Federal Courthouse. They were out front. They did not damage these buildings. Two men, Connor O'Shea and Mark Pettyborn, decided to head home. As they did, they were warned that there were vans of men in camouflage, driving around, abducting people off the streets. 10 minutes after this warning, a unmarked minivan pulled up in front of them, and 4 or 5 men in camouflage jumped out and tried to grab them. Mr. O'Shea ran and was then pursued by a second van. He was able to elude the van and turned on his camera and began recording. The image is dark. You're not able to see any video, but he was narrating his experiences. Pettyborn was captured by the first van. He describes being tossed into the van, being restrained with his arms over his head so he could not move, and then having a hood pulled over his face so he could not see. He describes being driven around downtown before being unloaded into a building, which he did not know or recognize, and again could not see. He was patted down, searched. His belongings were taken from him. He could hear people rummaging through what he believed to be his backpack and all of his belongings before he heard someone say, "This is a whole lot of nothing." He was put into a cell at one point, and there's a lack of clarity. One version of the story says he did go before someone who he believed at the time or seemed to be represented as a judge, but nobody knows. Nobody told him anything, and he was blindfolded for a large percentage of this experience. Nonetheless, two officers came in and Mirandized him and said that they wanted to ask him questions. He refused and asked for his lawyer. They decided not to continue, and 2 hours later he was released. Now, he discovered later that he had in fact been brought into a federal courthouse. He discovered later that he had in fact been taken by federal officers of an unknown agency. They had no identification. They gave no reason for detaining him, had no warrant. He was released without any records of his detainment, no citation, no paperwork, no evidence it had even occurred. So that if he had been abused, which he did not claim, but if he had, there would be no recourse. If there was no probable cause. Now, people have noted correctly that you don't need a warrant to detain someone or to arrest them. You need what's called probable cause. The problem is you do need probable cause. It's illegal to do it without probable cause. And so the question is, what was the probable cause in this case? Since there are no records of this detainment, nobody knows what the probable cause was. Nobody can contest the probable cause. There's absolutely zero checks and balances on what happened. Nobody even knows what agency was involved in that detainment. So it's impossible to ask if they have records on their side. There's no place even to begin. So the U.S. Marshal Service was asked about this incident. They are the ones who protect federal buildings. They denied ever having arrested him. That's fine. He wasn't arrested. He was detained. There is a difference, and that difference is very important for a number of reasons. Nonetheless, they denied arresting him. Question is, did they detain him? They did refuse to confirm or deny whether or not they had been using unmarked vehicles to drive around and grab people and detain them. Now, again, it's been pointed out, and this is correct, which is unmarked police vehicles are often used. Police do sometimes go around in unmarked vehicles. But this looked more like what's called a fishing expedition. They're trying to arrest someone to see if there is any evidence of a crime after you've arrested them, after you've gone through the belongings, without any probable cause. That's extraordinarily illegal, and we can't confirm if that's what happened or didn't, because all of the evidence has either, well, I would say been erased, but there was no evidence that we can tell in the first place that this occurred. We are going to show now video of one such arrest or detainment as it occurred. This will be, this should be, we'll put this in the center window. So give me 1 second and...
What are you doing? Use your words. What are you doing? Use your words. What are you doing?
I haven't done anything wrong.
Use your words.
What's going on, Soutter?
What is going on?
We need to know.
Who are you?
Why are you taking
NLG will get you out. What's your name? Tell us your name.
What's your name?
Okay, you're fine. We'll get you out.
Bro, what? Alright,
We got you, friend.
we got you.
Oh fuck!
NLG.
You just violated their rights.
Oh. Kidnapping people.
You just violated their rights.
Thanks for keeping them fucking. Oh.
This begs a number of questions. Why does it have to be an unmarked vehicle? Why can they not just say who they are? Why can they not wear badges? Why was there no record of this? I understand that there are times when that's necessary. That there are absolutely times when an unmarked police vehicle is necessary. There are times when officers are in plain clothes. Why here? Why now? And why this man? Now, there are people who have also suggested that, hey, he was wearing riot gear. That's probably sufficient for probable cause, to which I would answer, if he had been carrying an AR-14 slung over his shoulder, as he is constitutionally permitted to do, and President Barack Obama had said that constitutes probable cause that he has done or will do something wrong, and we will detain him there, they would be the first and loudest to decry a violation of his rights. What he was wearing doesn't matter any more than if he had been carrying an AR-14. Conservatives know this when it comes to guns. They don't know this when it comes to wearing riot gear. And I will admit, yeah, that's a little strange. Then again, I can't fathom why any human being would walk down the street with an AR-14 except to cause trouble. Maybe not shoot anyone, but to cause a stir, to cause attention, to be the center of attention. And maybe that's why some idiot wears riot gear going down the street. I don't know. I don't care. If Obama can't arrest your troublemaking, absolutely troublemaking man with a rifle slung over his gun, just trying to make a statement going down the street, a statement about his rights and about his beliefs, then this president cannot arrest that man or detain that man for wearing riot gear. Period. It's that simple. At any rate, keep in mind that this was not an arrest. This was, in fact, a detainment, which offers a wider latitude. However, there must be probable cause for a detainment. There may have been in this case, and whether or not that suit constitutes it is arguable for any number of reasons. I've stated my position already. And I think we should start going after people who open carry guns if this is going to be the policy. But I think it should be consistent. Nonetheless, since there are no records of the detainment, since there's no way to know what agency did this, his friends had nobody to call to check on him. When they said, "We'll check on you," the police department didn't have him. Nobody knew who had him. And again, why? What's the purpose of that? What's the purpose of this vehicle being unmarked? So there's no way to verify whether or not this was a legal detainment or not. None. No checks and balances. Director of the Civil Rights Project at Oregon Justice Center, Juan Chavez, said that this was a, open quote, this situation was, quote, stop and frisk meets Guantanamo Bay. Ashley Albez, a civil rights attorney with the National Lawyers Guild, stated that this detention was designed as an act of intimidation, and that it violates the right to free speech and the protections from unreasonable search and seizure. There is no evidence that either of the men who were approached by the man in the story that I said earlier had done anything wrong, and even if they had, uniformed police officers could have made an arrest or detention. And indeed, by nature of the fact that these men were let go, or at least, Pettyborn was let go, suggests that certainly there wasn't enough evidence to arrest them. So once again, we're back to a fishing expedition, which is absolutely and irrefutably barred by law. At this point, what has been occurring here has now been confirmed as part of a new program initiated by President Trump, currently exclusively being used in Portland, Oregon, but purportedly Mr. Trump wishes to expand this program nationwide. A program in which the founding premise is that the enforcement officers making the arrest cannot be identified. The agency cannot be identified. The vehicle cannot be identified, and there is no evidence afterwards of the detainment or arrest. That program, in my view, can have no other purpose but to intimidate people, to bully people. Now, much has been made of, well, gee, the officers didn't have to Mirandize him until later. Often people are Mirandized when they are arrested or detained immediately. This is done more just as part of the procedure so that by the time you start talking to them, it's already been done. Or if there's any confusion as to what constitutes banter, where the officer says, hey, what you been doing tonight, versus an actual interrogation, everybody's already been Mirandized. So you're not going to have a problem. So officers like to Mirandize people immediately, get it out of the way. But they're not actually required to until the interrogation actually starts. So no laws were violated by holding the Miranda warnings late. But the question is not about how and when the Miranda warnings were issued, but about the fact that every element of this was secret. Every single element. Sometimes officers Mirandize much later, that's true, but not usually. Sometimes officers pick people up in plain clothes, but not usually. Sometimes they use unmarked police vehicles, but not usually. And I'm not aware of it being the case that officers or an entire process like this can occur, and there is no availability of any paperwork confirming any element of it. It's the combination of all of this that has such a chilling effect, such to the point that to the best of my ability to discern, the entire civil legal structure of Oregon has now fiercely rebelled against this being done in their state. Mayor Ted Wheeler has said that the federal government's assistance is not welcome in this regard. They may protect federal buildings, and as permitted by law, they may arrest and or detain anyone who is damaging those buildings, but there's no evidence that anyone's aware of that these two men did either of that. If there is probable cause, there's no way to determine that, and these men were abducted reasonably far away from any federal building. If you want to have a conversation with them about any damage done to a federal building, if you have evidence, you don't have to pluck them up right off the street, which suggests that they were being followed, if that's the case. And again, that's not necessarily uncommon, but these were protesters, not criminals. Those are two different things. All these people have done, again, to the best of my knowledge, is simply speak out against the president. And when there was nothing in his backpack that could be used against him, they had to let him go, only because there are still some checks and balances. Mayor Ted Wheeler continued by saying that while the Federal Marshal Service may, and we believe now that this was the Federal Marshal Service, as well as the Immigration Department, we'll discuss that in a minute, while they may be able to arrest or detain people in regards to federal buildings, they may not snatch citizens off the street. He demanded that federal agents leave the city and said, quote, "We do not want or need their help. The best thing they can do is stay inside their buildings or leave Portland altogether." Senator Jeff Markley said that if this was an attempt by the president, I apologize once again, the if was correct. If this was an attempt by the president to look tough or to inflame tensions, that the Department of Homeland Security should leave the city. Quote, "Federal forces shot unarmed protesters in the face, the shadowy forces that have been escalating and not preventing violence are the problem." Oregon's Governor Kate Brown has said that she felt that this was an attempt to provoke a confrontation for political purposes. Quote, "This political theater from President Trump has nothing to do with public safety. The president is failing to lead this nation. Now he is deploying federal officers to patrol the streets of Portland in a blatant abuse of power by the federal government." At this point, the general consensus appears to be that this is actually not an attempt to try to rein in the protesting or the rioting, but instead to detract from the state of this country's COVID response, which we can no longer accurately tell because at around this time when this started, President Trump also shut down the Centers for Disease Control dashboard on the state of the COVID response across this country. This is public information that you and I are entitled to, that you and I need to make good decisions about the health of ourselves and our families. The CDC has one job: to accurately convey it. They are not a political unit of the government. The White House is, and now all this data goes exclusively through the White House, and none of us can get it unless it's filtered through the White House, which absolutely and irrefutably, A, it's not their job. B, they are not qualified. C, they do not have the infrastructure to proceed with this volume of data, and D, have an agenda with the data. Since they've been processing it, we haven't seen the data, where once it was in real time, because that's what the CDC is designed to do, we've been told we may get some data at some point as to what's going on in this country regarding the worst pandemic in 100 years. Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf has replied by calling the protesters, quote, a violent mob. He blames the city and the state for failing to restore order and argues that, quote, they have emboldened the mob as it escalates violence from day to day. The city of Portland has been under siege for 48 straight days. At each night, the violent anarchists destroy and desecrate property, including the federal courthouse, and attack the brave law enforcement officers protecting them. Despite those claims, the violence and size of the protests have been down over the 10-day period before this program was started. Donald Trump has now weighed in and said Portland was totally out of control, and they went in, and I guess we have many more people right now in jail. We very much quelled it, and if it starts again, we will quell it again very easily. Oregon Attorney General Ellen Rosenbaum has now filed suit against the federal government over these detentions, and over specifically the fact that there appears to be no probable cause. The order reads that federal agents have grabbed Portland citizens, quote, without warning or explanation, without warrant, and without providing any way to determine who is directing the action. These tactics must stop, she said. They not only make it impossible for people to assert their First Amendment rights to protest peacefully, but they also create a more hostile situation on our streets. Indeed, since these protests have started, federal buildings are now being attacked. We have an image, in fact, we'll show that in a minute. Rosenbaum is also seeking a restraining order to, quote, immediately stop federal authorities from unlawfully detaining Oregonians. So what I'm going to do now is I will take a few minutes. Our live chat has been very busy, and I apologize. It is just me on the show today, so I will have to try to engage with the live chat at the same time as... And we will, yeah, I do apologize. So doorknob head, Trump has crossed a new line. Whoops, another, whoops, another. Indeed, this is something different. This is something very different. The comparison to Pinochet is one that, or at least his policies, is one that I have been somewhat hesitant to make because I don't want anyone to suspect that I'm trying to say that he is a dictator or that's where he is. But this is basically one step shy of essentially where, and Pinochet did do this as well, where he held and intimidated the any political dissenters, and if that didn't work the first time, he would have them killed. Because there was no record of the agency that was arresting them, and because there was no evidence of who had done it, and in fact, there was plausible deniability, we wouldn't know any of this right now if it wasn't for the cell phone. It's only because of an invention called the iPhone that we know that this is happening. The government didn't even warn the civil authorities in Oregon that, hey, we're going to do this. So nobody knows. Question, what happens if you're not sure if they're police officers or not, or just some armed militia pretending, just because we've had militias who have said, we are going to engage now. We've had white nationalists who have said, we will engage as counter-protesters and fight these rioters who are anti-American. What if somebody has a gun, doesn't know that these are federal agents because they failed to identify themselves, and goes out and shoots one of them in what he believes is self-defense? This is supremely fucking stupid. You don't do something like this unless you're trying to cause trouble. Mr. Designs has asked if our officers are required to identify themselves. I think it depends on the state and on the circumstances, but in general, to the best of my understanding, they are actually not required to. in most cases, except at some point I believe they are. This kind of thing, again, can be done. It's just very rarely done and not without a deliberate cause. There are reasons it's a good idea to identify yourself as a police officer, not the least of which is so somebody doesn't shoot you. Now, if somebody does shoot a police officer and they thought it was in self-defense, that's going to cause a whole host of problems. So again, I do apologize. We're going slow, and we do have a backlog of... I'm going to try to catch... we are monetized. Anybody, if you would like to send a super chat, that's the easiest way to guarantee your comments are going to be read. Apologies, there's not much. That's just about the only way to guarantee it. I make every effort to demonstrate that, every effort to go through every part of the chat that I can. There's just a lot to get through, and there's a lot in the chat. Actually, what I may do is switch the chat over to the other window. That will make it a little easier to keep up. So if you will all bear with me for a second. Now, somebody, I think, had said somewhat facetiously, well, gee, military men wearing military uniforms. Again, it's not just that they were wearing uniforms, and that's not the sole part of the problem. The problem is the optics of everything that just happened. And in general, it is easier to facilitate peaceful arrests if you go about it peacefully. If you assume there's going to be violence, that's the easiest and best way to cause violence. And if you don't identify yourself and deliberately hide, because they are deliberately hiding any attempt at identifying who these people are, that's going to lead to violence. The American Civil Liberties Union has condemned these actions and said, quote, usually when we see people in unmasked cars forcibly grabbing someone off the street, we call that kidnapping. These actions are flat out unconstitutional and will not go unanswered. Nancy Pelosi tweeted, unidentified stormtroopers, unmarked cars, kidnapping protesters and causing severe injuries in response to graffiti. These are not the actions of a democratic republic. Department of Homeland Security's actions in Portland undermine its mission. Trump and his stormtroopers must be stopped. U.S. Customs and Border Patrol has now confirmed that they were responsible for at least one of these detentions. They appear to be acting under the authority given to them by the, quote, Protecting America's Communities Task Force. Well, I'll get to that in a second. This was an executive order signed by Mr. Trump, which expands law enforcement powers in protecting this nation's monuments. This act has enlisted U.S. Marshals Special Operations Group and U.S. Customs and Border Patrol to help protect federal property, dramatically increasing the penalties for damaging any. However, at least half of these detentions have occurred nowhere near any federal buildings. Just 1 week ago, the size and scope of the protests in Oregon were dying down. Social media was lamenting the fact that perhaps this was over. All of the enthusiasm and energy for the protests was getting drained. They were significantly smaller than they had been at any point prior. What are we going to do? We've lost, was the general cry of protesters on social media. That's not the cry today. And the protests are getting bigger. This is the office. Well, this is, so let's, this is that same building, the Justice Center, which prior had been undamaged and was presumably the site that they were trying to protect. No damage up until after this started. This is 10 hours ago. That was an unarmed protester standing there, doing nothing. He is hit repeatedly with a baton and then sprayed in the face. We're going to see that one more time. If Republicans can use the argument that there can be good people at a Nazi rally in Charlottesville, and that just because there are Nazis there, waving the Nazi flag and holding up Confederate flags and talking about Jews will not take my job, but there are good people in that crowd, just happen to be hanging out in that crowd and shouldn't be blamed with it, then that man who was shoved and didn't shove back by a police officer, who stood there unarmed and started to get beaten and even now has done nothing but keep his arms up. That man is innocent of doing anything until he actually does something there. He's a good guy. One of the good guys among the rioters. Once again, this is a double standard in regards to when conservatives hang out with the wrong people. Well, they're still okay and they haven't done anything wrong until they actually do something wrong. But people hanging out here, no weapons, no Molotov cocktails, standing there, maybe even trying to legitimately protest, or at a protest that suddenly turned violent, but he wasn't a part of it, are being assaulted and now just picked up off the streets. This is about 12 hours ago, actually, a rush of police officers into a crowd of protesters. And we will secure an attorney, bring one on to discuss these matters. Obviously, the Attorney General of Oregon is an attorney and is eminently qualified to make a determination whether or not this is actionable, and has decided that she will be acting to defend Oregon citizens against unreasonable search and seizure, which is how she views this and what has been happening here. But again, things were de-escalating. They were done. There were still riots and there was still damage being done, but far less than has been. Now it's worse again. Any theories why? All right. So, and the live chat is moving forward. So, what I may do is ask if there's there are specific questions that mods believe should be answered. If they could actually reach me in the Discord, I will not be capable of at this point keeping up with the number of chats and continuing with this story. So I'm going to continue. I would like to have actually Mr. Designs take the lead on that, and if he could DM me any specific questions that people would like to ask, I will do my best to answer those questions. But no co-host today, so I think I'm gonna have to disengage from the live chat for now. My apologies to our audience. I think social media is a big part of what we do here, and engaging is a big part of what we do here. So, but I think in order to bring this as best as possible, I'm not going to be able to continue. So the similarities between this and Pinochet are eerie and frightening. Pinochet, again, was doing what he was doing because he genuinely felt that the protesters were a danger to the state, not the protesters. These were just people were writing editorials because they undermined his ability to rule with an iron thumb, because he felt that was the only way to save Chile, conveniently. Trump has had similar instincts. He's expressed admiration not for leaders who have improved democracy and strengthened the cause of democracy throughout this world. He has openly talked about his admiration for leaders who are despots, who have controlled their people. He's asked them how they've done it. He asked the president of Russia, how do you keep people from criticizing you? Everybody knows how he keeps people from criticizing him. He kills them. Not a secret. So why does this worry me? Aside from the obvious? On July 4th, Donald Trump said, quote, in 1776 represented the culmination of thousands of years of Western civilization and the triumph, not only of the spirit, but of wisdom, philosophy, and reason. And yet, as we meet here tonight, there is a growing danger that threatens every blessing our ancestors fought so hard for. They struggled and bled to secure. Our nation is witnessing a merciless campaign to wipe out our history, defame our heroes, erase our values, and indoctrinate our children. Angry mobs are trying to tear down the statues of our founders, to deface our most sacred memorials, and unleash a wave of violent crime in our cities. Many people have no idea why they're doing this, but some know what they are doing. They think that American people are weak, soft, and submissive, but no, American people are strong and proud and will not let their country and all of its values, history, and culture be taken from them. This attack on our liberty, our magnificent liberty, must be stopped and will be stopped very quickly. We will expose this dangerous movement, protect our nation's children from this radical assault, and preserve our beloved American way of life. In our schools, in our newsrooms, even in our corporate boardrooms, there is a new far-left fascism that demands absolute allegiance. If you do not speak its language, perform its rituals, recite its mantras, and its fellow commandments, then you will be censored, banished, blacklisted, persecuted, and punished. It's not going to happen to us. Make no mistake, this left-wing cultural revolution is designed to overthrow the American Revolution. In so doing, they would destroy the very citizens that it rescued. They would destroy the very civilization that rescued billions from poverty, disease, violence, and hunger, and lifted humanity to new heights of achievement, discovery, and progress. To make this possible, they are determined to tear down every statue, symbol, and memory of our national heritage. Now, he starts in this speech by talking about the far left, and then moves to talking about the left in general. He expands this to say that anybody who thinks that there are problems in the United States, that perhaps we have issues with our police, with our cultural heritage, with some of the things that this country has done, and that perhaps looking those in the face isn't a bad idea. They all want to destroy the United States. No middle ground. None. They want to destroy the... That's what he said. I'm not putting words in his mouth. Another technical issue. Please hold. I apologize. I apologize. I believe we do have... Yes, we have... I'm sorry. We have super chats, and for some reason they did not appear on the dashboard. I do apologize. Thank you very much for your super chats. We really do appreciate them. I said that the super chat was the best way to make sure that I see your comments, and apparently they did not go through. So in 1 second, I will have all of the super chats. I apologize, and we will get through to those. But what that speech sounds very patriotic, and it is very stirring. And in my view, isn't particularly all that different from Pinochet's speeches. The rhetoric is identical. And I compare this to Obama's speeches, especially when even the radical right was causing him problems, but he never went out and called them out by name because he didn't want to further radicalize the left against them. That's what someone who is truly trying to unite people do. That's not what this president is trying to do. This is an us versus them mentality. And he's accusing the other side of doing it. He's saying this fascism on the left, if you don't speak their language, you're the bad guy. If you don't use the code words, you're the bad guy. I'll admit, especially with political correctness, I've seen a little bit of that. I absolutely have, and I'm not a fan of it. But what he's doing is several orders of magnitude different. This isn't the same thing. So once again, I will continue with our rundown. We're almost, I think, to the end of what we wanted to cover, but again, we're still waiting for the super chats to come up. Thank you very much for your support, and thank you for the super chats. What I will say, as we're going through this, we appreciate the support of our patrons. We have a Patreon hangout coming up. Anyone who wants to join. I'm also going to be in the Discord after this. We have a Discord. We'll be dropping a link, and there is one. There is one in the description, so if you'd like to join us to discuss this. The reason I had mentioned earlier, the national news is only starting to pick up on this, but what we have here is he has, as July 4th, used some of the most inflammatory rhetoric we've seen out of this administration, including suggesting that anyone who opposes him is, in fact, trying to overthrow the American Revolution. That's staggering. He used the word cultural revolution, too. There was a cultural revolution sweeping across America. That word is as loaded as saying lightning war, which Bush misused at one point. It's a term that has a very specific meaning. The Cultural Revolution by Chairman Mao in China. Murdered, just rampant, destroyed the culture, engaged in making certain even thoughts illegal. It was one of the worst times, certainly in Chinese history. It's called the Cultural Revolution, and Trump is now using that language and what appears to be a very deliberate reference to it to argue what's happening in the U.S. And while we'll talk about how it gets to violence in a minute, because there is violence and it needs to be stopped. But every tyrant who has ever come to control, including Adolf Hitler, who was democratically elected based on the notion that there are enemies out there, secret enemies, and only I can protect you from them. This is how it always starts. I'm okay. I'm not okay, but I can live with the fact that we are here, so long as this doesn't get any worse. But this is a staggering thing that is now happening in this country. Dim sum, nim sum for $2. Thank you. Enjoy the name. Yep, timed out. Figure is wrong. Don't think. Don't fly here. I'm not sure. You want to talk behind my back and time me out? That's okay. I apologize. I don't know if you were timed out or not, and I do apologize. If it's really an issue, hit me up on Discord and we'll talk about what happened. Our mods here do spectacularly well, and we stand behind them. My suspicion is if you were timed out, there was a good reason. We do have policies. Those policies are available and should also be in the community section if you want to understand what our policies are for chatting in the Discord and on YouTube. Xandering person, $10. Thank you, Xandering, very much. We appreciate it. I want to address this guy's supposed arguments, but typing on my tablet is a pain. Well, we'll be in the Discord probably in about 10 minutes. This show is going to be wrapping up, but thank you. All right. So, yep, I think that covers it. Actually, I think there was only two, but I do apologize. I've been, yeah. All right. Well, thank you, guys. Thank you very much for your support. And let's see if we can wrap this up. I would like to try to engage in not too much hyperbole myself, but like I said, in the same way that this is telegraphing. I don't know if Trump has any other darker intentions, but I know he's going to. And he's not much of a planner, so he may not have a plan for doing anything worse. but if anything gives him the justification to, he will. This is in my view, a staggering step towards authoritarianism. And again, it's only in one town and one state, but it has now been authorized. It has been authorized in presumably, or I shouldn't say authorized. Trump is now attempting to expand it nationwide. So actually, it appears I have missed a few other super chats. So let me see once again. I apologize. I think the system was just not quite. Yes. Okay, these are some good questions too. Okay, $5 from Inkboy. Thank you very much, Inkboy, for your super chat, and I apologize to Inkboy, Dim Sum, and his Andering person for being so slow on the uptake there. That's actually entirely my fault. I apologize. If you can't identify the person making the arrest, can you resist such as a kidnapping? I honestly think to some extent that you should be able to. I don't remember if this was addressed by the Supreme Court or not, but as of right now, the general thinking is no, officers don't actually have to identify themselves. I think some states do require it. I think it's a very good policy anyway because you don't know. We do have the right to bear arms. So what happens when somebody who's got the right to bear arms and is exercising that right and is armed to the teeth, and somebody tries to initiate an arrest against them without identifying themselves? I think that's a policy that protects police officers too. It obviously protects citizens. You should have a right to know who's arresting you. Right now, you do not. Well, actually, you may for an arrest. Remember, there's a difference between an arrest and a detention. And police can detain people almost, well, I shouldn't say almost indefinitely. There's usually a period for how long before they have to make a decision to either arrest you or, but they can in the O.J. Simpson case, which is one where I just remember this becoming a very big issue. Did they have probable cause to enter his house, and or did they fabricate that just because they knew he might be destroying evidence? And so what they did was they said, well, we thought there might be a suicide going on. These things occur with suicide, so that was probable cause, and they went onto the property. At that point, if they see any evidence, they can use it, which is a bit of a problem because then it incentivizes the fabrication of probable cause, which is probably what happened there. Nonetheless, the other thing that they can do sometimes is, they'll say, okay, we're about to get a warrant to, open your safe and take a look in your safe. Why don't you just open it for us and let us see? And then we say, nope, I won't. It's like, okay, fine, poof, you detain everybody there so nobody can destroy the evidence, so nobody can do anything. You argue probable cause later. You don't actually have it, but you just detain everybody. Everybody's stuck. Nobody can do anything until the warrant arrives. Then you proceed. Technically, that's legal. It's a little shady. I'm not sure how much I'm against it. I'm probably against it some, not enough I make a big stink about it. But again, that's how it's those little things, how you get to here. Well, it was a detainment, so it doesn't matter that he wasn't Mirandized till the last second. It doesn't matter that there are no records. It doesn't matter that they searched all his belongings without a warrant. It doesn't matter because it was a detainment. Well, that's a problem. It may be kind of... Okay. So anyways, the long answer to a short question. Again, called in time, not on time. If you want a short answer to a question, don't ask me. Sorry, if you want a short answer to a long, it doesn't matter. I do think if you listen to the language of that speech, the people who are tearing down these statutes, which by the way, Trump is talking about protecting Oregon, and he said that the reason they're there is to protect Oregon. The people of Oregon, the civilian officials there, don't want that help, don't want that protection, and feel that they're doing just fine. So the question is, at what point, why does Trump think he should be stepping in? This is precisely the one thing that Republicans usually say should never happen. The federal government saying that, well, the states aren't doing a good job protecting their citizens, so we'll do it for them. Why is it when they say that on health care, they're like, oh, it's overreach. But when it's Trump coming in and abducting people off the streets, no, it's fine. The civilians weren't doing anything. It's their state. They think things are just fine, and they don't want him. And he said he's going to be there anyway. The protesters may be damaging this property, but one mayor of I want to say, I think it was a southern state, I forget what it was, walked in on protesters pulling down a, a statue, and he asked them to stop so that it could be done properly the next day by the crew he had sent to go do it. Doesn't mean they were right to do it, but it's not the same thing. The protesters think our history is nuanced, not that the United States is a terrible country. They don't want to obliterate the United States, but it's nuanced. It doesn't weaken us to acknowledge this country's genuine faults, including genocide against the Native Americans. Deliberate, one of the first uses of biological warfare when we used poxed blankets and handed it out to the Native Americans. Theft and conquest of huge parts of the Midwest, what was then Mexico, that we stole in a war we engineered or just stole outright, and now called Texas, New Mexico, swaths of Nevada, and Southern California. We did these things. Now, our history is rife with acts of murder, terror, genocide. It doesn't make us evil. It makes us the same as every other country in the world. It makes us the same. We try to talk about we're the best country there is, and the only way to sustain that narrative is to whitewash everything we've done. We don't like it when the Germans whitewash their history. We say, hey, you can't do that. You have to own what happened there, and it's important because it's the only thing that stops it from happening again. And then we whitewash what we've done. And there's a lot of it. The protesters aren't trying to say America's a horrible country. It's trying to say it's a flawed country, like all the others. And Trump is suggesting that that argument is a crime against him and against his country. It's an act of terrorism. And once you've taken that step, he's even suggested declaring, it was when the riots were occurring in D.C., he was suggesting in his speech there that these were all enemy combatants. Well, once that's declared, they don't even need to see a judge. You take American citizens and throw them off in Guantanamo Bay because they're terrorists for expressing their ideas. Well, how do you... And some of them are going to be the rioters. We've had riots before. Some of them aren't. Without a judge, without due process, how are you going to separate them? How are you going to separate that guy that we just saw getting smacked around by a baton? He was there. Does that mean he's guilty? If so, we need to revisit Charlottesville. At any rate, Justice Pinochet had argued that any criticism of him was an attack on his country. Trump has been setting up that very same argument. Nobody's saying that all the protests are nonviolent. The vast majority have been. Nobody's saying they all are. Nobody's saying that the destruction of property is okay. But Trump would rather deal with the symptoms than the disease. He had said that the violence has been quelled, and if necessary, will quell it again. Look up quelled. If it's been quelled, we don't have to quell it a second time. It was quelled once. You only have to quell once, hence the word quelled. What he's doing is dealing with the symptoms. He hasn't dealt with the actual problems. I apologize. Hold on a second. What he's doing is he's managing the symptoms basically by trying to beat and intimidate the protesters. The founding fathers weren't gods, and if their contributions to this country were so insignificant and their memories so fragile that tearing down some statues is going to cause the destruction of this country. This was never a country worth saving in the first place. Are we that fragile? I believe it's more. I believe it's these ideals that since 9/11 we have been so terrified of our fragility and their fragility that we've been giving up too many rights in the protection of ourselves and in the name of security against an enemy that's one part real and 2 parts fabricated by this government, so that we will hand over our rights and say, do whatever you need. Again, the exact same thing the Republicans, more than anyone, have warned us against. And they've been right on that front. I've agreed with them on that front. 9/11 occurred because of a few faults in our safety systems, in our ability to communicate between the CIA and FBI. These could have been fixed. You could have made it so airplanes could just dump fuel. You could have also changed the policy so that the doors were reinforced and would never be opened at any. There's a few things you could do. Instead, we shredded the Constitution, created the Patriot Act, actually had for a while until it was finally ejected this notion that anybody who works for any authority, your oil man who puts in the oil, if he's actually working for the state, is required to, if he sees anything in your house through your windows, to report it. That's going to encourage peeping Toms, I think. And we got rid of that one, but we kept a whole bunch more. The fact that that could even get into a bill was insane. Yet these very tactics of fear and be afraid of what the other side is doing, so give me more power and let me do what I want to protect you. These are the tactics that are being used. That fear that we have, the terrorists want us to be afraid because they know that's how they'll beat us. It's a part of asymmetrical warfare. The tip-off is the name. Terrorists. We get scared. We say, let's abandon our principles and our values. Let's abandon the rest of the world. We isolate ourselves, and eventually we go down. All right, thank you for that. I will check on that. It was actually the same rhetoric. Ronald Reagan deserves most of the credit for destroying the Soviet Union. How did he do it? He made them so afraid of our nuclear weapons that they had to outstrip us 5-1. Thing is, we didn't have nearly as many weapons as we said we did. The reason we claimed to have more was to scare them into making even more, and their economy couldn't take it. They collapsed. It's asymmetrical warfare. Sometimes it's the only way to beat someone who's a lot bigger than you, or at least it's the tactics of fear. And if this country is to be a shining beacon of democracy, then we have to defend that democracy, not only when things are going well, but when our own citizens are rioting in the streets. We are going to be judged not by how we deal with our citizens when everything is hunky-dory, but how we deal with them when when we're having conflicts and open battling in our streets. How do we respond as professionals with respect for our own countrymen, or with brutal authoritarian tactics? That's the definition of liberty. Not what happens on Sunday when you wake up in the morning and wonder, what am I going to do on this day off? Am I going to go to church, or am I just going to have a big lunch at the Denny's buffet? That's not freedom. Trump ended his fourth speech by saying, quote, "No person who remains quiet at this destruction of heritage can possibly lead us to a better future. This radical ideology attacking our country advances under the banner of social justice, but in truth it would demolish both justice and society. It would transform justice into an instrument of division, and would turn our free and inclusive society into a place of repression, dominance, and exclusion." What I find interesting about this is he has denied the fundamental premise of everybody who is either rioting or protesting. They want to be heard, and they don't want to shut down the conversation from the other side. They want the other side to come to the table and talk. Nobody's trying to shut anybody up. They want to be heard. Violence is the language of the unheard. I think that's the quote. I don't normally use that. Ethan's a fan of that one. But that was Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. There is a terrible problem in this country, and it is being ignored by those in power because it simply does not affect them. But this country belongs to all of us equally, and it's time we all start talking. Trump thinks that people should only talk on his terms. And if they're not saying that he's the best president ever, and if they're not saying that America can do no wrong, then they've already violated anything that would allow him to come to the table. That's the definition of authoritarianism. This country is perfect, and any claim of grievance against it is an attack on it, and we will not tolerate such attacks. It's authoritarianism. So I think we're just about. We're going to have a lot of discussions. I think on the Discord, I'll be there in a few minutes. We have to talk about federal property and who protects it and under what grounds. Miranda rights, when you can do that. The lack of paperwork, lack of transparency. What is probable cause? But I would like to finish with a tweet here. I think it's from Fox News Sunday, and unless I'm going to double check on the super chats, and I appreciate everyone's patience with me. We've been watching this for some time and trying to figure out. In my mind, this was so stunning. I wasn't going to go to air with this. We had this in the script from a couple nights ago, and I'd missed it, and I was like, we need to understand it. Chris Wallace asked, and this is July 19th, 2020, 9:51 a.m. Chris Wallace asks Donald Trump. It's today. Can you give a direct answer? Will you accept results of the election? President Trump. I will have to see. No, I'm not going to just say yes. Thank you all for watching. We will see you in the Discord in a few minutes.